Ace and Beaky here. If nothing else during my downtime, if I can just put out simple video game ideas for your entertainment, we're just brainstorming out loud and shooting at the wind. And if YouTube decides to take that down because it's a harmful conspiracy theory against, well, people who deserve to have harmful conspiracy theories aimed at them, then YouTube has apparently not just lost its morals, it's like not even there. It's like sleepwalking. At that point, it's like, okay, YouTube, you're a senile old man. Somebody needs to just, we love you, Grandpa. Please sit down. No, you can't drive anymore. No, sorry, we are taking your guns away because you're 87 and crazy. Anyway, the thing is that one idea that I wanted to have is that what would a potentially good idea for a Redwall video game be? Now, with respect to the people who made the Redwall video game, I think they even got Brian Jake's blessing before he passed away. May he rest in peace. But the thing is that with Brian Jake's, he wasn't really a fan of video games. He was old school. He was a happy, loving old school, but he was old school. Brian Jake's was old school. And at least as far as I can tell, awesome man. It's really sad that he was I read 7 of his books during high school, and it's really sad that he died while I was on deployment, kind of near the time of my birthday. So while I was in Afghanistan, and it was either a month before or a month after, I think it was February, he died, and it's like, oh man, I hadn't read one of his books in a long time, but he passed, and it's real sad, real sad. He was an amazing writer. I have my criticisms in the fact that after a while, a lot of his books begin to look the same, and sometimes he's a bit too formulaic with good characters being too good and bad characters being too bad. But even then, the fact that he wrote such wonderful creative descriptions, a breathing world of anthropomorphic animals that, although medieval, and although the good characters were too good and the bad characters were too bad, it was actually kind of grounded in reality. It wasn't sword and sorcery, it was realistic fantasy. And the fact that if it wasn't for the fact that the characters were talking animals and that they had an over-the-top alignment of either being completely good or completely bad, everything outside of those two big in-your-face factors was actually a fairly realistic take. It didn't have a whole bunch of magic in it. It had some supernatural stuff like the ghost of Martin kind of being a ghostly guardian angel, but a lot of people feel that's real, so it's like it's not even that fantastic if it stops right there. But the thing about Redwall is that I was thinking to myself, how would a good game of Redwall be made? Now, I know that they've made a Redwall game, and I want to be nice to the people who made it because somebody's making a Redwall game and it looks like they're putting forth a lot of effort, but some of the people who played it, unless they're diehard Redwall fans, haven't been that impressed. There have been games that remind people of Redwall that said, this isn't Redwall, but it's the closest thing to a really good Redwall game we have. And I've heard things about Ghost of a Tale from some people, and I've heard about some things about Tooth and Claw, which is Redwall with commies in it and cannibalism. Oh boy, Redwall with communism and cannibalism. I guess we'll call that Russia Wall. And then there's Inherit the Earth, which is a point and click adventure that looks like Redwall, but it's in a post-apocalyptic world, so it's kind of like Redwall, but the spine is Fallout. But it's a largely medieval anthropomorphic adventure that's right along the lines of what a good Redwall game would look like. And if you kind of wanted an over-the-top insane thing that's you like Redwall, but you're also kind of into anime and stuff, I guess you could say Dust and Elysian Tale is something that it probably feels more like if you're into anime, but you also like some Redwall in it. That would probably be close to it. And these are good games, but the thing is that there's not, from what I understand, there's not been a real knockout good Redwall game. And I was thinking, well, how could Redwall be a good game without it just feeling like a derivative clone of another one? And I was thinking, well, maybe the game should be multifaceted in the fact that it's not really just one game that's action or puzzle with a couple of mini games in it. Maybe it should be that it's two things at once. And I was thinking to myself, if you take combat and the action and adventure part out of Redwall. You know, whenever metal meets metal, or whenever sword meets flesh, you'd realize that a lot of the Redwall's world building is based on the characters taking care of medieval life. The food, the cooking, the craftsmanship. You know, every other story tends to have like a detective story to it. There would also be things where it's like before the battle, they would have to set up medieval defenses. And they would have to run the crops and run the farming inside. So I was thinking that in a way, even though I would say that one half of the Redwall video game would have like combat and stealth and stuff, I'll get to that in a second, the first half of it would actually be kind of a sim. Would kind of be a medieval sim that involved, a lot of cooking and a lot of farming. Because even though I wouldn't make that the entire game, Redwall is known for its epic battles. There would be a lot to it that would be overseeing Redwall Abbey. So it would be kind of like, it'd be like, okay, well, let's take what works with Farmville and tower defense games and cooking mini games like Cooking Mama. And the thing is, this kind of plays on the economy of a game where you set up making sure that the towers are defended, making sure that the anti-siege works are built, making sure that you've got the farming and the cooking done to keep everybody alive and happy, and some stuff that would involve some detective work that would be probably a cross between Eco on PS2, the kind of the prequel to Shadow of Colossus, Eco on the PS2, and Professor Layton, because there would be some detective stuff. But the thing is that I'm saying for the game to work, it would be less of that's a cool mini game and then we're going out to some cheap ripoff of fighting, and to be like, no, all that stuff would be half the game. Half of the game is about Redwall Abbey in and of himself, like The Sims. You are in charge of assigning people different jobs, making sure they get along, and that you have kind of like the farming thing, kind of like Stardew Valley, but in Redwall. A tower defense part, but in Redwall. Cooking Mama, but in Redwall. Professor Layton, but in Redwall. That would be half the game. It wouldn't just be a shit ton of redundant mini games. It would be half the game in and of itself. Whenever it comes to the other half of the game that's more action, adventure, and combat focused, we could go one of two routes. If we went with the first-person route, it would probably be a lot like Kingdom Come Deliverance, a realistic medieval sword-fighting emulation where there's no magic, there's no steampunk technology, you just have to work with what you have. So it would probably be like it'd probably be Kingdom Come Deliverance with just a little bit of Far Cry Primal involved, because maybe they could kind of make not realistic but very possible weapons, kind of like what the Aztecs did, where you put like a bunch of bees in a fruit, and then a hollowed out fruit, and then you throw it at somebody, and then it's basically like you throw it like a grenade and it's filled with bees. Or maybe they could come up with some kind of medieval equivalent of napalm that existed, but outside of that, if it was first person, you would go with Kingdom Come Deliverance and Far Cry Primal, because that would also do like the stealth part and the unorthodox tactics. If it was third person, I'm going to say that whenever you're in the stuff where it's missions, where it's combat, I'm going to say that the combat would be an interesting mix between Shadow of Mordor, Shadow of Colossus, and what was the other one? It was Shadow of Mordor. Oh, Prince of Persia Warrior Within. And here's why I say this. Now, Shadow of Colossus, that would just be kind of applied to some of the bosses where, if you were fighting something like Asmodeus or a giant cat or something, if it's a big enemy, you would have to crawl on it and do locational damage. And I don't think this should be based off of any one Redwall book, but get the Redwall license and kind of create a new story from there so that you can have flexibility. But I think it's like, if you're supposed to be something that you could do, is that I would say Shadow of Mordor and Warrior Within. And here's why. Prince of Persia Warrior Within has a lot of the parkour, but it's very weapons focused in the fact that you can take enemy weapons and use them on your own. And Redwall would have a diversity of melee weapons that would be their own things, ranging from crudely made hammers and axes that are borderline Stone Age to the various different types of weapons, whether there's something that's more influenced by Vikings and medieval Europeans to the more Arab and Middle Eastern influenced pirates. So the thing is that what would be interesting is that the one area where you could have a diversity would be like in Prince of Persia Warrior Within, where you're not just doing parkour, you have the combat heavy thing, but it's in the same way that Borderlands is gun porn. Warrior Within was sword and axe and club porn. And the fact that you could just go through so many weapons that would eventually break, but every time you slew an enemy, there would be an option to have it. And the thing is that, you could throw a weapon that you have, so if, like, you're slaying enemies and one has a better sword, or it's not so much better, it's more to your liking, the physics and mechanics and the heft of it, you could throw the one that you don't like to finish off one and, replace it in the other hand. Now, I think that the overall gameplay concerning the offensive stuff should be like Shadow of Mordor. In Shadow of Mordor, you didn't really have a lot of magic. You had like the magic version of something real, like a bow and arrow, or magic that just kind of like enhanced some of your movements. We could explain that away with using real stuff like bows and arrows and the fact that it's a mouse, or it's a badger, or it's an otter, so that they would have senses, animal senses that humans wouldn't have, and they would have the stamina and agility and stealth that a lot of humans wouldn't have. So there's that. But the thing is that the combat leading up to it, it should have the stealth system of Shadow of Mordor, but more importantly, it should have this thing where in Shadow of Mordor, it had this auto-generating orc chieftain thing where you went and you assassinated Uruk-hai and orc chieftains who had unique personalities, and you could also play them off against each other, and you could climb the ranks and like create dissension by assassinating this leader and setting up a bad leader to take its place. Whenever you read the Redwall books, there's always some evil warlord of the vermin, whether it's a rat or a weasel or a fox, and stoats and ermine, which are kind of like weasels, to the obscure, rare case of a pine marten or even a wolverine. And the thing is that you would have an interesting thing where you would have to see if you could kind of if you're trying to protect the good Redwallers in the castle, but you are being laid to siege by some Clooney-esque warlord or some leader of assassins like Farago, you would have to see if you could sow dissension among the ranks by causing little mutinies against each other, which a lot of the bad guys are already at each other's throats if you read the book, but also you would have a system of trying to assassinate chieftains, pirate captains, generals, whatever the term is. You get the idea. You would sow dissension among the ranks and you would assassinate leadership. So what that applies to in Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War, that would actually apply very well to the combat-oriented action of a Redwall game. And I already told you how whenever you get into combat, it'd probably start out feeling like Shadow of Mordor's mechanics, but it would be a mixture between Shadow of Mordor's fighting mechanics and Prince of Persia Warrior Within. Because one thing that could add spice and variety would be not only the different chieftains that you would assassinate or determine to fight each other, with unique personalities, and, they wouldn't just be variations of one creature like it was in Shadow of Mordor. These would be like, this would be a rat, this would be a bilge rat, this one's kind of based off of pirates, this one's based off of Vikings, this one's based off of early medieval warlords, and it's like one would be a rat, one, and there's this one that's a weasel, and there's this one that's a stoat, a fox, an ermine, something like that. So I think that part would play out, especially if you incorporated combat from Prince of Persia Warrior Within, so you could kind of go through different weapons in the same way that you went through a bunch of different weapons in Borderlands, but the medieval sword version of that. And like I said, if you get in a fight with a really big boss, like if you're a mouse and you're fighting a wolverine, you could have, kind of that locational damage from Shout of Colossus where you climb on it and try to hit a weak point, try to get around its armor. You could also, and like I said, that would be half of it. You know how whenever you play Persona, half of the game is being social and talking to kids at high school, and the other half is actually going down and grinding in dungeons? Well, it would kind of be like that, except the social part that's not combat, it's mixed with being like a medieval farming slash tower defense simulator, as well as something of a detective game, because there's usually a lot of detective subplots in Redwall. Like with Madameo, while the others are questing, Constance has to hold down the fort against crows trying to attack her. So it could make up for it in the fact that you're not a human, and your enemies aren't human. You would have different animals that you could play as or interact with or have at your command even, and you would be fighting different animals that, even though they're not spellcasters, they would have different stats. I'll also say one thing, that if the combat was at least partly like Shadow of Mordor or Batman Arkham City, is because if you play as different things, the fighting style is going to be different. Sure, if you play as a character that's kind of like the Sword of Martin or a big bad Badger Lord, it's going to be that whole medieval warrior coming in with a weapon. But if you play as the Hares, it's going to be an acrobatic martial artist, because Hares of the Long Patrol, even though they probably, still favor weapons, they tend to train in martial arts resembling, I'm guessing, European kickboxing? So the thing is that you would have a variety in that, to where, whether you used a dagger or a spear or your martial arts, it would be so specialized. It would be so unique that it wouldn't just be like Skyrim, where all the swords kind of vaguely feel the same. No, to make it feel more unique, to expand on it, to fill in the area left behind because there's no magic in this mechanic, each weapon and each fighting style would be made to feel very different and very unique. So even if you liked one, and even if it wasn't the best fighting style overall, if it suited you, then it was the best thing for you to go with. Anyway, this is Ace and Beaky, and I'm just talking about what it would be like, what a good Redwall game might look like. Hopefully somebody will take advantage of this. Redwall's kind of an unheard of, Redwall's kind of like something that I think a lot of people have heard of, but it doesn't have a lot of backing to it. Hopefully one day it'll, get a little bit more popular, but that's just my idea. If they wanted to be creative, if somebody who knew what they were doing could get a hold of the license. Anyway, Ace and Beaky, over and out.